To solve the God's riddle, we will take the property of multivariance as our starting point. In other words, let us accept as a postulate the fact that reality has an infinite variety of forms of manifestation. Despite the general nature of our postulate, you will see how interesting and unexpected insights it reveals. Let's start with the fact that the forms of manifestation of reality must have a source from which all this diversity comes. Where are all the laws of our world written? Our world manifests itself as the movement of matter in space and time. This movement is subject to certain laws. As you know, points are located on the graph of a function according to a certain mathematical formula. We can say that the law of motion of a point on the graph is the formula of the function. But formulas, like laws, are abstract inventions of the human mind, created for ease of understanding. It is highly unlikely that nature stores all these formulas somewhere. How else can it store the location of points on the graph? Of course, in the form of an infinitely large set of coordinates of all points. The capacity of human memory is limited and cannot handle infinity. But for nature, infinity is not a problem. It does not need to generalize the location and movement of points on the graph in the form of a formula. If we divide the line of a function into infinitesimal points, then each point can be considered as a cause and the next one as a consequence. As a result, any movement of a material point in space and time can be represented as an infinitely long, continuous chain of infinitely small causes and effects. In our knowledge, we represent the movement of matter in the form of a law, and in nature, this movement is inherent in its natural form, as an infinite number of causes and effects. Roughly speaking, data on all possible points of movement of matter is stored in a certain field of information, which we will call the space of variance. It contains information about everything that was, is, and will be. The variance space is a completely material information structure. This is an endless field of information containing all possible variants of any event that may occur. We can say that the variance space has everything. We will not ask ourselves how this information is stored. For our purposes, it does not matter. The only important thing is that the space of variance serves as a template, a grid of coordinates for any movement of matter in space and time. Each point in space has its own version of a particular event. For ease of understanding, we will assume that the variant consists of a script and a scenario. The scenario is the appearance or form of manifestation, and the script is the path along which matter moves. For convenience, you can divide the space of variance into sectors. Each sector has its own scenario. The greater the distance between the sectors, the greater the differences in scenarios. A person's destiny is also represented by many options. In theory, there are no restrictions on the scenarios of a person's destiny. Since the space of variance is infinite, any insignificant event can affect the turn of destiny. Human life, like any other movement of matter, is a chain of causes and effects. The effect in the space of variance is always close to its cause. One follows the other, so the sectors of destiny line up on the line of life. The scenarios and decorations of sectors on a line of life are more or less homogeneous. A person's life flows steadily along a line until an event occurs that changes the scenario. Then fate takes a turn and moves on to another lifeline. Imagine watching a performance. The next day you return to the theater for the same show, but it was already on a different stage. These are closely spaced lifelines. In the next theater season, you see a play with the same actors, but with significant changes in the script. This lifeline is already further away. And finally, after seeing the same production in another theater, you see a completely different interpretation of the play. This lifeline is already very far from the first one. Reality manifests itself in all its diversity precisely because the number of options is infinite. Any starting point results in a chain of cause and effect relationships. By choosing the origin, you get this or that form of manifestation of reality. We can say that reality unfolds along the timeline. Depending on the chosen reference point, you get what you choose. You have the right to choose, precisely because there are already an infinite number of options, of choices. No one forbids you from choosing your own destiny. All destiny management boils down to one thing: making a decision. Transurfing answers the question of how to do it. So there is an information structure that contains an infinite number of potential possibilities, choices, with their own scenarios and settings. The movement of material. Realization takes place in accordance with what is inherent in this structure. The process of movement of matter through the space of variance can be demonstrated in the form of the following thought experiment. Imagine a tube filled with water. An ice ring slowly moves along the tube so that the water freezes quickly only inside the ring. It turns out that the ice crystal moves through the tube with water. Water molecules remain approximately in the same places in a relatively free state. At the moment of passing the ring, the molecules inside it are fixed in a frozen crystal of a certain structure. And then the water in this place thaws again, and the molecules are released. The crystal itself does not move. In other words, in this case, the ice does not float in the water. It is not the ice crystal itself that moves in the tube with water, but the structure that is the frozen state. By analogy, the water in the tube is the space of variance, and the ice crystal is the material realization of the options. The molecules are people, and their position in the crystal structure is realized as a variant of destiny. There is no definitive answer to the question of what the ice ring is analogous to. In other words, how and why does the structure of information become matter? In the microcosm, matter can manifest itself as a clot of energy. It is known that the birth and annihilation of microparticles occurs constantly in a vacuum. Matter, so to speak, is, but at the same time, it does not have its own material substance. Only one thing is clear: what can be touched has an intangible energy basis. I hope I haven't tired you too much with physics. So far, we are only at the starting point of transurfing. But what you will learn from this book may surprise you to some extent. Therefore, I inevitably have to give at least some kind of theoretical justification so that your mind does not lose ground beneath your feet. That is why I ask you to be a little more patient.